In 1858, a chained Django endures the brutal Texas heat, torn from his wife and under the iron grip of slavers. But when a mysterious bounty hunter named Dr. King Schultz arrives, Django's path to freedom and revenge takes a deadly turn. Together, they set out to hunt Django's captors, igniting a mission that will shake the South to its core.
Easy, good fella.
Today we will be recapping the 2012 movie called Django Unchained. The story opens in 1858, just 2 years before the start of the Civil War. Under a harsh Texas sun, a group of enslaved black people trudges through the barren desert, chained together and led by two brutal traitors, the Speck brothers, Ace and Dickie. Among these weary captives is Django, a man who has recently been separated from his beloved wife, Broomhilda von Shaft. As night falls, the group's journey is abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious traveler, Dr. King Schultz, a former dentist turned bounty hunter from Germany. Spotting the group in the darkness, Schultz approaches the Speck brothers. Ace, irritated and suspicious, demands to know Schultz's business and threatens him if he doesn't leave. Unfazed, Schultz responds in a calm, measured tone, claiming to be a weary traveler in search of two traitors known as the Speck brothers. But Schultz's true intent is more calculated. He's there specifically to locate Django. Having heard about Django's knowledge of three fugitives known as the Brittle brothers, Schultz hopes to use him to identify these men. Confident in his plan, Schultz casually inquires if any among the enslaved group has ever lived on the Carucan plantation, setting up the opportunity to find Django. When Django responds, Schultz raises a kerosene lantern, illuminating Django's face to confirm his identity. Schultz quickly engages Django in conversation, asking if he recognizes the Brittle brothers, who Django names as Big John, Ellis, and Roger, or Little Raj. Django explains that these men once served as vicious overseers at the Carucan plantation, where they inflicted pain and terror upon the enslaved people. Schultz listens carefully, confirming that the Brittles are no longer mere overseers, but now wanted outlaws. He then presses Django, asking if he could still recognize them if he saw them. But before Django can respond further, Ace intervenes, furious at the ongoing discussion between Schultz and Django. Schultz, keeping his composure, insists he's simply trying to purchase Django for a legitimate transaction. However, when Ace refuses and escalates by aiming his gun at Schultz, the bounty hunter quickly reacts, shooting Ace in the head in a single deadly shot. With Ace dead, Schultz turns his attention to Dickie, shooting the younger brother's horse, which collapses, pinning Dickie to the ground. Schultz approaches with an air of calm authority, sarcastically apologizing for the horse's death and warning Dickie against acting recklessly. Though Dickie is seething with anger and frustration, Schultz remains in control, instructing him to name a fair price for Django. Schultz points out that Django's knowledge of the Brittle brothers is of great value to him. Reluctantly, Dickie agrees. Schultz then sets the remaining captives free, leaving Dickie's fate in their hands. As Django dons Ace's coat and mounts a horse, he begins his journey with Schultz toward freedom. The next day, Django and Schultz ride into the small Texas town of Daughtry. Django, now a free man, draws shocked stares from the locals, who are astonished to see a black man riding on horseback. The townsfolk's reactions grow even more alarmed when Schultz and Django enter an inn, causing the innkeeper to flee in panic. Schultz reassures Django, explaining that, unlike most people, he despises the institution of slavery and chooses to make his living as a bounty hunter, profiting from bringing in criminals instead of enslaved people. Schultz offers Django an intriguing deal. In exchange for helping Schultz locate and kill the Brittle brothers, Django will not only earn his freedom, but also receive a reward of $75. Schultz, sensing Django's resolve, agrees to let him personally exact his revenge on the Brittles. During their conversations, Schultz learns more about Django's motivations and the depth of his love for Broomhilda. Django explains that Broomhilda was raised by a German-speaking family, the von Shafts, and worked as a house slave, which gave her a familiarity with the language. Moved by Django's story, Schultz suggests that after dealing with the Brittles, they focus on tracking down and freeing Broomhilda. The pair journey to Tennessee, where they make camp and devise a plan to infiltrate a plantation owned by Spencer Big Daddy Bennett, where the Brittle brothers are believed to be working. Schultz prepares Django to act as his valet to gather information without raising suspicion, allowing Django to choose his attire for the role. Upon arriving at Big Daddy's plantation, Schultz smoothly explains his supposed business interest. He wishes to purchase an enslaved person as a front to observe the plantation's inhabitants. Big Daddy, a prominent plantation owner, consents, ordering one of his servants, Bettina, to show Django around. As they walk, Django slyly asks Bettina about the Brittle brothers, although she doesn't seem to know them by name. However, she unknowingly mentions the Shaffers, who have recently visited the plantation. With this clue, Django follows her lead and soon spots Ellis Brittle. Elsewhere, the other two brothers, Big John and Little Raj, are abusing a young slave boy named Jody in a stable. Enraged by the sight of his former tormentors, Django seizes the moment to confront Big John, killing him on the spot. He then advances on Little Raj, savagely beating and shooting him repeatedly. Schultz arrives in time to witness Django's vengeance as he completes his mission by killing Ellis with a precise rifle shot. Later that day, Big Daddy organizes a posse to retaliate against Django and Schultz for their actions on his plantation, even though Schultz had presented a legal warrant. When Schultz warns Big Daddy of the legal repercussions of obstructing his duties, Big Daddy refuses to back down. Anticipating trouble, Schultz devises a clever ambush, using explosives to wipe out the posse. Schultz then hands Django a rifle, allowing him to eliminate Big Daddy as he escapes. After the ambush, Schultz and Django share a meal together, discussing the future. Schultz, realizing Django's determination and skill, proposes a partnership in bounty hunting. By working together through the winter, Django can earn enough to pursue his ultimate goal of buying Broomhilda's freedom. Django accepts, marking the beginning of a fierce bond between the two. As the seasons change, Django and Schultz track down numerous bounties, with Django honing his marksmanship and growing more adept at his new trade. With the arrival of spring, they return to Texas for another mission, where Django eliminates a target named Smitty Bacall, keeping his first handbill as a memento of his achievement. This period allows Django to amass experience and wealth, inching ever closer to rescuing Broomhilda. Eventually, their journey leads them to Mississippi, where Django witnesses the brutality of slavery on a larger scale. Schultz's inquiries reveal that Broomhilda is now owned by Calvin J. Candy, the ruthless proprietor of Candyland, a sprawling plantation infamous for its inhumane mandingo fighting, a brutal practice where enslaved people are forced to fight to the death for entertainment. Understanding that this mission will be their most dangerous yet, Schultz devises a meticulous plan to approach Candy under the guise of purchasing a mandingo fighter. In time, Django and Schultz are invited to meet Calvin Candy, the flamboyant and ruthless owner of the notorious Candyland plantation, in his gentleman's club. When they arrive, Calvin is finishing his entertainment for the evening, an intense and brutal mandingo fight where two enslaved men are forced to fight to the death for his amusement. Django, repulsed, refuses to watch, while Schultz reluctantly observes, biding his time. After the fight concludes, Schultz approaches Calvin, who is basking in victory alongside his champion fighter, Fred. Schultz plays into Calvin's ego, offering him a lucrative $12,000 deal, ostensibly for one of Calvin's most prized mandingo fighters. However, this offer is simply a ruse to secure a meeting and negotiate for Broomhilda's freedom under less suspicious pretenses. Intrigued by the extravagant sum, Calvin agrees to their business proposition and invites them to Candyland to complete the sale. The next morning, Schultz takes a moment to speak privately with Django, reminding him to stay calm and suppress his emotions once they reach Candyland if he truly wants to reunite with his wife. The journey to Candyland, however, soon takes a dark turn when they come upon Calvin's menacing slave trackers, who have cornered a runaway mandingo fighter named D'Artagnan. With his back against a tree and nowhere to escape, D'Artagnan pleads desperately with Calvin, explaining that he's unable to fight anymore due to his injuries. But Calvin, cold and unsympathetic, mocks D'Artagnan's failure. As Calvin goads him, Schultz, visibly disturbed, attempts to intervene, offering to cover the fighter's cost as an alternative to punishment. However, Django interjects, keeping the cover story intact and ensuring they don't blow their plan. Despite this, Calvin then turns to Django, asking if he has any objections to how D'Artagnan should be dealt with. In a chilling display of cruelty, Calvin orders his attack dogs to be unleashed, and Schultz and Django are forced to watch helplessly as D'Artagnan is torn apart. Trying to mask their revulsion, they continue to Candyland as if nothing happened. When they arrive, they are greeted by Stephen, the head of Candyland's household, who is both shocked and indignant at seeing a black man, Django, arriving on horseback like a free man. To clarify the situation, Calvin explains that Django is indeed free and orders Stephen to show him and Schultz the appropriate respect. Schultz then requests that Broomhilda be prepared for him to speak with, under the pretext of examining her to ensure she meets his standards. As Django catches glimpses of Broomhilda's treatment, locked away and let out in chains, his anger intensifies, but he restrains himself for the sake of the mission. Inside the estate, Broomhilda is released from confinement and cleaned to make her presentable for Schultz. That evening, Calvin's sister, Lara Lee, escorts Broomhilda to Schultz's quarters. Speaking in German to avoid the suspicions of Calvin's staff, Schultz gently informs Broomhilda of the plan and assures her that they're there to rescue her. At dinner, Schultz continues the charade, presenting Broomhilda as his escort. During During this tense meal, Broomhilda is visibly anxious, especially when Schultz introduces Django, who eventually reveals his true identity to her. However, the dinner soon takes an ominous turn. Steven, ever watchful and perceptive, becomes suspicious of Django's relationship with Broomhilda, particularly after seeing her emotional response to a comment from Lara Lee. Steven confronts Calvin, suggesting that Schultz and Django are likely not interested in purchasing a fighter, but instead intend to acquire Broomhilda under false pretenses. Realizing he's been duped, Calvin's demeanor changes. He and Steven mock Broomhilda's connection with Django, aiming to rile him up, but Django barely manages to keep his composure. With the situation fully exposed, Calvin dismisses most of his guests, leaving only Schultz, Django, his lawyer, and himself in the dining room. Calvin's gaze is hard and triumphant as he reveals that he knows about their deception. To assert his power, Calvin has Steven drag Broomhilda into the room and grip her neck painfully, making it clear he won't let her go easily. Calvin then announces a change in terms. The $12,000 will now be the price for Broomhilda alone, not for any Mandingo fighter. Schultz, angered but left with no choice, agrees to Calvin's terms, though the interaction is filled with tension. After the papers are drawn up, Calvin insists on a handshake to finalize the deal, a symbolic demand meant to humiliate Schultz and remind him of his own perceived superiority. Schultz, pushed past his breaking point, snaps. Unable to stomach Calvin's smug cruelty any longer, he pulls out his pistol and shoots Calvin dead on the spot. In the ensuing chaos, Calvin's bodyguard, Butch Pooch, retaliates, fatally shooting Schultz. Enraged and devastated, Django grabs his gun, embarking on a furious shooting spree throughout the mansion. He kills Butch, Calvin's lawyer, and several of Calvin's guards before finally surrendering when Steven and Billy Crash take Broomhilda hostage. The next day, Django finds himself in the hands of Calvin's sister, Lara Lee, and her remaining men. Enraged by Django's defiance, Billy begins to torture him, nearly castrating him, when Steven interrupts, informing them that Lara Lee has decided on a different punishment. Rather than killing Django outright, she opts to sell him to the LeQuint Dickey Mining Company, condemning him to a slow, grueling death in the mines. With Calvin dead, Lara Lee is now forced to take charge of Candyland and its business. While en route to the mining company, Django formulates an escape plan. He tricks his escorts by showing them one of Schultz's old bounty handbills, claiming he's a bounty hunter pursuing criminals back at Candyland. Promising them a share of the reward, he persuades them to release him, and as soon as he's free, Django kills the escorts and takes their weapons and dynamite. Determined to end things once and for all, he heads back to Candyland. Upon his return, Django eliminates the plantation's trackers and retrieves Broomhilda's freedom papers from Schultz's body, pausing for a moment to silently honor his fallen friend. He locates Broomhilda, who's been confined in a secluded shelter, and rescues her, giving her back the freedom they had both risked so much to reclaim. As they prepare their escape, they witness the arrival of Calvin's mourners, returning from his burial. That night, Django takes his final stand. As the guests gather inside the mansion, Django bursts in and eliminates each of Calvin's remaining men. He personally kills Billy Crash and Calvin's sister, Lara Lee, in a blaze of vengeance. With the bloodshed complete, Django orders 2 enslaved women to leave and bid a final farewell to Lara Lee. Steven, desperate to save his life, tries to reason with Django, but Django is unmoved. After shooting Steven in the knees, Django activates the dynamite he had strategically planted around the mansion, trapping Steven inside as the estate erupts in flames. From a safe distance, Django and Broomhilda watch the manor explode, a blazing symbol of their victory and newfound freedom. Together, they ride off, leaving the ashes of Candyland and its horrors behind. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.